Hello Wolfden, my name is Voltorn Elda and welcome back to the Voltage Reviews. In today's episode we are going to take a look at a game we played a while ago named Rive. Now, what does Rive mean, you may wonder? It means to tear something apart with quite some force, and that is precisely what we did in Rive. Now, if you want to know how we give the scores to the games we review, check out the description below for a little guide. Now, without wasting any more time, let's get started. Rive is a 2.5D platformer shmup or shoot 'em up game that takes place in and around a spaceship while you as a player are operating a powerful spider tank. An interesting little detail to the game is that you are observing your own little tank in what the main character, named Roughshot, calls the side-scrolling game view or switching to shmup mode. It gives the screen a tiny bit of a curve in the corners, but it's barely noticeable if you don't pay attention to it. It gives the entire feel of an 80s arcade side-scroller game. When it comes to the visuals of the different levels, you'll be traversing several different sections of the ship, which all have a slightly different feel to them. And although it is difficult to diverse a lot when it comes to the entire spaceship setting, you can notice how the developers certainly did their best to make every mission feel a little different in visuals. It also helps that our Roughshot is a little rough around the edges himself, and wherever he goes, destruction lies in his wake. The further you progress through the game, the more you'll see the results of your actions, which adds a very nice detail to the overall adventure. As you drive your way through the spaceship, you'll often see stuff happening in the background, like pieces of a train floating in space, which happens to be the very same train which you just used to try and break through the hull of the ship. However, the feeling that everything looks a little too much alike remains in place. There aren't too many enemy types, and some of the boss fights are just larger versions of the little guys. I can understand that the developers did their best to create as much diversity as possible, but it remains a thing you need to keep in mind. But now the question, do I think that Rive needs to be punished for this feel and thus be awarded with a lesser point? I'm not entirely sure. Rive certainly succeeds in creating the right atmosphere with the perfectly matching visuals, so in that regard it wouldn't deserve to lose out on points here. So, for that reason, I'm going to award Rive with a full Volt point for the visual category. In the end, it might just be a matter of taste, but you can't deny that the visuals look pretty cool and epic. And hey, who doesn't like explosions? Moving on, we arrive at the story element of the game. Our spider tank controlling badass Roughshot is drifting through space in search of loot, bolts and scraps. His radar stumbles upon a supposedly long dead spaceship, which goes by the name of Galaxian Service Vessel number 6, which surely must contain some valuable scrap, and perhaps a fuel station to solve the low fuel levels. During his rampage, he often butts heads with a guide drone named Daryl, or DLL, who seems to love to test the power of his robotic friends against the destructive force of Roughshot, as the two of them slowly build up a rivalry. As the search for scraps and fuel continues, Roughshot gets himself into more and more trouble, which often results in a lot of exploding metal. The story is told during short conversations whenever Roughshot and Daryl meet, and at the end of mission screens, which sort of function as a logbook for Roughshot. However, by the time Roughshot intends to try and leave the spaceship, he notices that achieving that might be a little harder than expected. Overall, the story is simple enough to follow, and the main focus of the game remains mostly on just blowing everything up. The story is thus merely complementing the gameplay in a rather enjoyable manner. There isn't too much and also not too little in my eyes, and for this I feel like Rive deserves a full Volt point for the story. Next up, we need to talk about the level design. In Rive, you can be sure about the fact that you'll die quite often, at least on your first playthrough. Luckily, the game has a very large amount of checkpoints. Never did I feel frustrated about having to redo an entire section or mission because the checkpoints were so frequent. You'll often get overwhelmed by all the stuff that is happening around you, and sometimes it all is just a matter of trial and error. When it comes to the control scheme, Rive only has a few basic things you need to do. You walk, jump, shoot and hack some robots, and every single one of those things is easily explained in the very first mission. The same sorta goes for the enemies which you'll face. They first appear in small numbers before they will be thrown in your face in large amounts. There is very little else I can say about the level design, except that it feels like it has a proper progression. The further you get, the harder things will become. Unfortunately, at some point in the game, you are often killed thanks to unexpected attacks from large groups of enemies. Without knowing what is about to happen in those cases, you'll quickly be thrown back to the last checkpoint. The only word I can come up with for these situations is that it sometimes feels cheap. Certain deaths just seem unavoidable the first time around, and even though you get tons of checkpoints, the trial and error aspect becomes a little too strong nearing the end of the game. I think I can call myself a decent gamer here, but I can certainly see how these overwhelming deaths can be a problem for a lot of others. I am quite split on the score here, but I don't think I'll be able to award a full fault point here. However, it still deserves half a point fair and square. Now, let's take a look at the timescale. During my own let's play, it took me around 3.5 hours to get through the story mode. For some people who have more trouble with the difficulty and the trial and error aspect of the game, it can be quite a bit more. I had hoped that the campaign would have lasted a little longer than it did, and I feel like the developers could have visited several other areas of the spaceship. After you complete the campaign and certain parts of the story, you'll slowly gain access to post-game things like a mission select, in which you can replay through one of the 13 original missions and add some extra difficulty like the speedrun mode or the single credit mode if you feel daring, which is basically a perma-death run. It's always nice to have this extra content in games like these, for it adds a little extra challenge and replayability. Besides the mission select, there are also 18 challenges of various degrees which take place in areas you've previously visited in the game. However, even though these challenges add extra content, I noticed that after playing the first challenge I couldn't start the second challenge immediately, because it would only unlock tomorrow. The same happened once I finally completed that second challenge, and I had to wait another day to start challenge 3. The content here is time gated and it forces you to return another day to keep playing. This feels like a rather player unfriendly design flaw, and I'm not sure why this content is even time gated in the first place. Besides the challenges, the game also has 3 battle arenas, which are basically just replays of some of the previous challenges with the goal of surviving as long as possible. However, here I also noticed something weird, because you can only access these 3 battle arenas after you follow the Steam community page of Rive. If we also look at the arena battles, it makes me wonder why they picked these 3 specific survival rounds in the first place, because there were even more of these situations in the campaign. Although the idea of this post-game content is fun and might prove for some extra gaming time, it just feels weird to me how it is locked off with a time gate for unlocking or forcefully requiring you to follow the Steam page. It makes me wonder with what purpose this was done. I can only guess why they did it like that, but I'll leave that one up in the air. I wasn't sure if the amount of gaming hours you could get out of Rive, combined with the extra content, would be worthy of a full fault point here, but the time-gated challenges and strange follow requirement, they just leave a strange and bad taste on an otherwise decent game time when looked at the game's price tag. Perhaps it's something which shouldn't affect the eventual Timescale score if I were an official reviewer and were to focus only on the number of gaming hours, but I'm not an official reviewer, and if I am to reduce the score anywhere for this terribly weird feeling, it has to be done here. So unfortunately, because of this, I can't award Rive with the full score, so half a fault it sadly is. Moving on, we are going to check out the audio, which isn't something that needs a lot of words. The audio and music is just epic. Sometimes the music gets drowned in the sound of bullet fire, robot cries and explosions, but there still is a noticeable difference between the very quiet moments and the big fights. All in all, I can be very quick here and say that the audio is pretty spot on and very enjoyable to listen to while turning tons of robots to scrap metal, and thus it deserves the full fault point. From audio we move over to the most important aspect of this platforming shooter, the gameplay aspect. As you're rushing through the ship, you'll be running, jumping and shooting in your little spider tank. The controls feel pretty easy, even though the game sometimes requires you to make split-second decisions or get the perfect aim to destroy the incoming hostiles. As I've mentioned in the level design section of this review, there is quite a bit of trial and error at certain parts, which may halt your progress to a complete stop before you manage to overcome the challenge, only to be faced with a new problem a few seconds later. Besides shooting stuff, your spider tank is also equipped with a hacking device, which allows you to take control over a few bots. This includes a healing bot, a shooter which gives you a little bit more temporary firepower, and later on in the game a slightly larger smash bot which propels itself right into the face of enemy bots, going for the close combat. It is a fun gameplay element, but I feel like it is completely underused. Sometimes you are required to hack these bots to progress, but quite often you have destroyed everything in front of you already before you got the chance to go out of your way to hack one of those bots. It sometimes didn't even feel worth it to go out of your way to hack one of these bots because you would get damaged by other things in the meantime. I feel like a lot more could have been done with this gameplay element if they changed how these buffs worked, like to let them change the playstyle in some way, instead of the hack bots just being temporarily power-ups. Overall, it just feels like a large missed opportunity. However, I do feel like the gameplay was quite fun, and even though the bot hacking could have been more useful, I still feel like the gameplay was rather enjoyable, so I'm going to give Rive a full fault point here too. Finally, we move over to the enjoyment factor, and if you've seen my Let's Play, you can be certain about the fact that I loved this game. It was crazy, hectic, epic, and the humor was pretty sweet. I quite often had to laugh out loud because of the madness which was going on. Thanks to the large amount of checkpoints, the game didn't feel too punishing when you inevitably died, and it served as a decent buffer for the times it would get frustrating. But because it never really reached that point for me, I say that Rive deserves the full fault point here for enjoyment. Which brings us at the end of the Voltor's review for Rive. With lots of explosions and an awesome space adventure, we calculate our final score for Rive, and the end result is a solid 8.6 out of 10. A deliciously insane, humorous and epic shoot 'em up. If you have also played through Rive but disagree with certain aspects of this review, don't hesitate to let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you are interested in seeing my own playthrough of Rive, then click the annotation at the top to directly go to the playlist of the Let's Play. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more. Have a very nice day, and remember, have fun.